What's up, guys? We are taking yet another look at a NECA Godzilla figure, and this is the most recent live-action Godzilla and the most recent Godzilla movie that I've watched. I finally sat down and watched this despite having wanted to see it since it came out, and that, of course, is SHIN Godzilla. So this is our standard packaging for the line. We've got him there front and center in that big clamshell package. We've got the classic Godzilla there on the backer card, and then the back has got a huge product shot of SHIN Godzilla himself as well as our logo. So let's pull this guy out and take a look. Alright guys, here he is out of the package, and this is definitely a figure that I was really interested to take a look at. Not just because I only recently saw this movie, but because he has such an interesting design. This Godzilla is just so very different from a lot of the past Godzillas. And yeah, that's a big reason for why I wanted to look at this one. So after this review, if you guys are interested in snatching up some Godzilla figures for yourself, if you're like me and have been diagnosed with Godzilla fever, head on over to Big Bad Toy Store. I'll put a link down below. But let's dig into this guy. We'll take a look at articulation first, as always, and then we'll get into all of the details behind this guy's sculpt. So as far as moving this guy around, he does have a decent bit of articulation, but I gotta say right off the bat that some of these joints were damn near frozen solid. So I had to exert some serious force to the point where which I thought he was going to break to actually get some of this stuff to move around. And honestly, a lot of these joints are pretty inconsequential just because of the design and because of what he is. So we'll take a look and see how he moves real quick. Head can swivel. He doesn't really have any up or down. The jaw, however, is very articulated. I mean, look at that. That's just awesome. He has such a weird mouth compared to other Godzillas, and this thing opens fully, kind of like a snake almost. The neck rotates, and you get full motion there. Nothing impeding. Arms are... I'm not sure what's going on at the shoulder. Frankly, the arms are really inconsequential because this might be the one Godzilla that really doesn't use his arms at all. They are so small and such a non-detail in terms of his design. So they can rotate in that socket, but these are really tight. And then he does have hinges at the elbows, and then we've got rotation in the elbow as well, and then rotation at the wrist. But the arms really don't do a great deal. Legs can swivel. Those humongous legs. There is a single jointed knee, and this is where I had to really force him. So it moves, but only, you know, slightly. And then there's a ball peg down here at the ankle. So you can rock back and forth, and you can move forwards and backwards, and you can rotate. But honestly, once he's on the ground, he's on the ground. Really, you're just kind of adding a little flair to his pose when you move those legs around, because he sits on this tail, and the tail is just enormous. I mean, it's a massive piece of plastic. This thing is very large. It's bigger than I think it's bigger than any other Godzilla in this line, just based on size, which makes sense because this is the biggest Godzilla. The tail has a ton of articulation, so you can rotate at the base, and then each other segment is ball jointed. They get more movement as you go down just because of the fact that the pieces of plastic are smaller as you move. So you can rotate, and then you can bob a little bit at this one, and then you can rotate here, and you can bob even more, rotate, and then this last one you have to put on. It's a ball peg. It was a pain to get that thing to snap on, but it has full range of motion. That said, though, you still have to kind of keep the spines in line with each other, just so you kind of keep that sight line going. So he does have a decent bit of articulation in terms of overall points of articulation, but at the end of the day, I mean, he's a humongous chunk of plastic, so you can only really move him so much. Now, where this guy really comes through for me is definitely in the sculpt and the paint. This thing just looks amazing, and I'm partial to this design in general. I just think that there's something amazing and cool and just nasty and gross about this particular Godzilla. He is so different, but he's still very similar. I mean, this obviously is Godzilla. Even if you didn't know what he was, you'd say, oh yeah, that's a Godzilla. And that's exactly what we've got here. So this particular figure has a ton of sculpted detail all over the skin because this particular Godzilla has, you know, cracks and crevices all throughout his skin. And then, of course, he glows that nice red glow. And you can see they bring that sculpt out because every nook and cranny in this figure has part of that red paint wash that's in there. And I think in a general sense, just at a base level, it's pretty amazing. I'm very happy with it. The spines that run down his back are all fantastic. They're very nicely lit up with that paint application, so to speak. And then that runs all the way down to the tail. This is, you know, a specific form for Shin Godzilla, so if you aren't familiar with this particular version, this is a Godzilla that evolves into different forms. This is the fourth form of Godzilla, so the one that is more quote-unquote Godzilla-like. And, you know, the only thing that would have made him better for me is if he had a blast effect, but we are actually going to get that in an upcoming figure because he sort of changes when he uses his powers, so I can understand why we didn't get it. It's just always one of those things that I'd love to have, but hey, I'm getting one eventually just with a different figure attached. But as far as this particular figure goes, you know, I think sculpt-wise, he's really, really solid, and I'll show you against another Godzilla figure and then a non-Godzilla figure just how much plastic we're talking about here in a moment. But in terms of the body and everything, I think from the tail to the neck, this thing is pretty solid. I don't really have any issues with it. If I have any true issues with the figure in general, it's just that some of those joints were really stuck. But ultimately, I got that taken care of. I don't have any blemishes. I don't have any kind of nicks or paint splotches or anything like that anywhere. I mean, everything about this figure is really cool. It just speaks to me. I dig this design. You know, like I said, I'm partial to the design, and I think NECA killed it. So it's kind of a twofer. I like the design, and they translated it really, really well into figure form. Beyond the figure itself, you know, we do have to talk about this head at least for a little bit, because this is such a different design for Godzilla. He is very much a Godzilla, but he is also his own thing. So you've got those tiny little beady eyes in there, and I swear these almost look like they're following you as you kind of move the figure around. Something about them just looks really, really fantastic. You've got the spikes that come up the side of the neck and on the back. Everything about it is just painted really nicely. And then, of course, you've got that mouth full of disgustingly gnarled teeth, which is another kind of characteristic, another hallmark of this particular Godzilla, is that he is kind of a mess in terms of his physiology. Everything about him is just really different, but you can open that mouth up, and like I said earlier, it's kind of like a snake almost, where he kind of unhinges his jaw, and everything just kind of splits wide open, even more so when he uses his blast effect, which I assume we will see in the upcoming figure. So, you know, from the neck down, I think this figure is pretty fantastic, but the head on this guy really sells it for me. I think it just captures the look of this Godzilla really, really well. And for sake of comparison, like I mentioned, here is Shin Godzilla up against the Reactor Glow Godzilla that I recently reviewed. And you can see that they're very similar, but there's something about this particular Godzilla. He looks like he's a lot more plastic. I'm not really sure if that is or isn't the case, just because it's kind of hard to tell when they're up next to each other. But I do know that this guy definitely weighs more. And everything about him is just bigger and beefier. And even the tail is kind of, you know, different. Obviously, it's different in sculpt. And you can see that if it was laid out long ways, if it was actually flattened, which you can't do because that's the style for this Godzilla, it would be longer than this guy, and this is kind of the standard for this line. So I think that in a general sense, at least as far as value for money goes, you're getting a lot of money and a lot of plastic when it comes to this guy. And then outside of the Godzilla line, let's take a look at something else. We've got just kind of a standard Legends figure. We've got the Marvel Legends Nova figure here, and you can see that they stand roughly the same. They're not too far off in terms of height. But in terms of overall bulk and girth, there's a whole different level of plastic here when it comes to these two toys. And that's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing. So here you can get an idea of just exactly how monstrous this guy is in terms of just plastic usage here. They obviously don't really scale at all. This Godzilla is, you know, absolutely enormous. But he is an imposing figure nonetheless. So at the end of the day, after kind of dipping my foot into the water with Godzilla figures lately, I would have to say that this is definitely my favorite so far. Obviously, I'm really partial to this particular design. I've already said that a few times. It's still very fresh in my mind because I only recently watched the movie, but I really dig this design for Godzilla, and I think NECA did a solid job translating that design into figure form. He does have some issues in terms of actually moving around, and my joints were really, really, really stuck, so much so that I thought I was going to break him at times, but he does move around. There are functional joints. You can pose him, and he just looks menacing and imposing, and that's really what I wanted him for, that gruesome, nasty look, and I think it excels in that way. So that's going to do it for this look at the NECA Toys Shin Godzilla figure. Let me know what you guys think. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and until next time.